he who is a master of his own internal void creates a gravity so powerful that the souls of others have no choice but to fall toward him. Nietzsche. Many men spend their entire lives believing that power is a reserved territory, something destined only for those born under the sign of fortune, lineage, or unreachable hereditary influence. They observe from afar, feeling that the ability to attract and dominate is a mystical gift rather than a practical tool. However, what Machiavelli taught us cuts through the centuries like a sharp blade, revealing that power is not a privilege of birth, but a pure art that can be learned, cultivated, and finally mastered by those who dare to look into the abyss of human nature. You need to understand that women, like all those who orbit around a charismatic figure, do not respond only to your direct actions, but primarily to what you project in their imagination. If you learn to manipulate this image and lead the invisible game that occurs in the lines of silence, they will inevitably begin to beg for your attention, for your recognition, and for your constant presence. And the secret of this attraction does not reside in please or in striving to please, but in transforming yourself into the irresistible magnet that attracts everything to itself without needing to ask for anything in return. The first truth you must embrace is that power attracts much more than physical beauty, superficial charm, or even accumulated money. Power is the primordial flame that hypnotizes even the minds that claim to despise it in public. It is for this reason that Machiavellian thought maintains that it is much better to be feared than loved, because while love is a fickle sentiment, fear generates a solid respect, and respect is the father of obedience. In the field of interpersonal relations, this fear does not translate into violence or brutality, but rather into the sophistication of mystery, calculated coldness, and the silent mastery of one's own emotions. When you choose not to reveal yourself completely, leaving gaps of information, you allow their imagination to fill the empty spaces, awakening an uncontrollable anxiety and a deep need to decipher the enigma that hides behind your mask. It is in this incessant search for answers that they draw closer and closer, to the point where they begin to beg for proximity. The foundation of all this magnetism is unshakable discipline. For the man who cannot control himself ends up becoming a slave to his own impulses, and a slave will never be able to inspire true devotion. The man who masters every gesture, every inflection of speech, and every movement of the eye seems to transcend the banality of the common man. Imagine the impact of entering an environment and, unlike the majority, not launching into excessive words or desperate attempts to be noticed. Just being present, motionless as a statue, transmitting a security that few possess, because the absence of haste transforms instantly into a demonstration of power. When you eliminate neediness from your posture, you create a magnetism that they perceive unconsciously, starting to pursue you because they want to be the chosen ones to break your indifference. Machiavelli insisted that a prince should seek to be loved and feared, but above all, he can never allow himself to be despised. In the game of seduction, contempt is born at the exact moment you place yourself in a position of inferiority, surrendering all your value at once and begging for crumbs of attention. The man who begs has already lost the battle before it even begins. The man who positions himself as the prize, as the gravitational center around which others must revolve, is the one who makes others beg for him, because human desire is moved by what seems inaccessible. You must understand that what is too easy or delivered without any resistance loses all its perceived value. That which seems distant and requires real effort to be reached becomes precious in the eyes of the observer. By creating an aura of scarcity around yourself, you make them begin to compete for your gaze and try to prove they are worthy of your attention. There is a crucial detail that most ignore. Women do not necessarily surrender to the man who talks the most, but rather to the one who listens with calculated attention, who observes every movement and who does not react immediately to external stimuli. This selective silence is interpreted as a sign of depth and superior intelligence, making every word you finally decide to utter become charged with immense value. Each of your gestures begins to be seen as a sentence, and each look as a promise of something extraordinary. And it is in this terrain that true fascination is born. They beg not for your shouts, but for your silence, and not for what you offer in abundance, but for the crumbs you deliver with deep meaning. This is the essence of the Machiavellian economy of power. Give little so that each fragment seems to be much. Think of the dynamics of ancient courts, where every smile and every tilt of the head were movements rigorously calculated to communicate status and intention. You should not live as if you were begging for others' attention, but rather as if the entire world owed you an audience, because your posture is what creates your social reality. Machiavelli understood that appearance often matters much more than essence, because appearance is what guides the immediate perceptions of the masses. If you appear great, even if you are still in the process of building it, people will come to believe in this projection and will act as if it were a fait accompli. This collective belief transforms into an absolute social truth, and that is how leaders and kings are forged through time. Common men become irresistible magnets when they project an image of inevitability from which no one can escape. The flame of this power needs to be constantly fed by strategic distancing, because every time you refuse to be available, every time you delay responding or disappear only to return with more intensity, you feed in them a sense of lack and a growing urgency. The human heart is biologically programmed to value what it feels it can lose at any moment. If you are never absent, if you never create a real risk of loss or a doubt about your intentions, you will never be able to awaken a true and deep desire. Managing absence as a strategic weapon allows you to condition people to beg for your presence and your approval. This should not be seen as cruelty, but rather as a strategy of survival and dominance, because power is not born of naive kindness, but of a cold and precise calculation. Men judge more with their eyes than with their hands, because everyone can see your image, but very few have access to your real essence. Therefore, become a spectacle, become a rumor, become a legend in their minds. If you can make them talk about you in your absence, planting seeds of curiosity, you will have already won most of the battle. They will beg because you built the myth that your presence is an indispensable and rare resource. To be the target of pleas, it is necessary to understand the hidden psychology that moves the engine of desire. Whoever controls people's imagination ends up controlling their behavior, which means that the true struggle is not for rational logic, but for the images you plant in her emotional memory. By becoming an archetype of strength and mystery, you cease to be seen as just another man in the crowd and start to be viewed as an inevitable destiny. And in the face of what is inevitable, instinct speaks louder than reason, leading to surrender and the search for validation. The fundamental secret is never to deliver exactly what they expect at the moment they desire it. If she expects affection, offer distance. If she expects indifference, offer a sudden spark of attention. This contrast creates cracks in her perception, transforming you into an enigma impossible to ignore. The human being is naturally attracted by the challenge and by what they cannot dominate immediately. If you surrender entirely, her curiosity is satisfied and interest dies. But if you deliver only carefully chosen fragments, she will feel forced to pursue you to try to assemble the complete puzzle. In this pursuit, power remains entirely in your hands. Machiavelli said that a prince must know how to be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to scare the wolves that surround him. In relationships, this means having the astuteness to perceive hidden intentions and the ferocity to impose limits that no one dares to cross. When a woman perceives that there are walls she cannot simply tear down, she learns to respect you deeply. Respect is the irreplaceable foundation of any desire that intends to be lasting. Because while love without respect is a passing passion, love accompanied by respect becomes a voluntary and continuous submission. They beg precisely for that which they cannot violate, but which simultaneously invites them into a selective proximity. Few understand the overwhelming force of not responding immediately to a provocation, or of not running to justify oneself in the face of a misunderstanding. Silence makes her mind fill the void with fantasies, doubts, and anxieties that work in your favor. Every minute she spends without knowing what you are thinking is a minute in which your space in her mind grows exponentially. The man who is always available becomes disposable, but he who keeps the mystery alive becomes unforgettable. It is in this fertile space of uncertainty that she begins to search desperately for signs, for explanations, and for any fragment that can break the enigma you represent.
This game is not about cheap manipulation, but rather about rigorous internal discipline. You need to be the master of yourself before you can dominate anyone else. The man who despairs, who reacts with anger, jealousy, or anxiety, reveals a weakness that will never be the target of real desire. However, the man who remains motionless as a rock in the face of provocation, and who does not lose himself in endless justifications, he indeed becomes unreachable and consequently irresistible. Human beings intensely desire what they feel they cannot possess completely. It is not about being cruel, but about being extremely selective with your own energy, remembering that the value of a diamond resides in its rarity and not just its aesthetics. If you were available on every corner, distributing your attention without criteria, you would become common and invisible. But by preserving yourself and offering your attention as if it were purified gold, each of your gestures is amplified in the imagination of others. By projecting this greatness, you will create devotees who were not convinced by logical arguments, but enchanted by your presence and your aura of authority. The great irony of this process is that they will firmly believe they are free in their choices, when in fact they will be trapped in the invisible web of triggers you carefully wove. Supreme power consists of leading others without them realizing they are being led, making them beg for something you planned in detail. Machiavelli considered this silent victory the noblest of all. Never be in a hurry to reveal your cards, for time is your weapon, and waiting is your safest fortress. The longer you sustain the mystery, the deeper will be the fall of whoever tries to decipher it. For the human mind is a slave to unfinished stories and unfulfilled desires that end up turning into obsession. Become the interrupted music in her mind, and she will beg to hear the next note and live the chapter you have not yet delivered. Machiavelli understood that human thirst goes beyond superficial pleasure. It seeks meaning and connection with something greater. Many fail by offering only the immediate, forgetting that true power resides in transforming oneself into a deep psychological symbol. When you represent strength, ambition, and dominance,
You occupy a space in her mind that no common company could fill. She begins to associate you with a promise of greatness, and for that promise, she will be willing to beg for continuity and fusion. Create your invisible theater where every absence and every appearance are movements designed to maintain the suspense of the narrative. The moment she enters this story led by you, she ceases to be mistress of her own steps and begins to long for the next revelation hidden behind the curtain. Her mind needs to believe that you are a rare opportunity and that any carelessness could result in a definitive loss. You do not need to be perfect. You just need to seem inevitable through an upright posture, a firm gaze, and a silence that projects an unshakable force. This initial impact is enough to plant the seed of submission that time will take care of nurturing. Understand that begging does not always mean falling at someone's feet. It can manifest in the anxious search for approval, in the attempt to tear a smile from you, or in the deep restlessness when you do not appear. It is her soul bowing to the mysteries you created, consuming itself in questions without answers about your whereabouts or your feelings. This emotional imbalance is your greatest ally, for it forces the other person to seek in you the relief for the anxiety your own posture generated. The common man fluctuates between euphoria and despair, but the man who masters himself remains in constant balance, communicating an absolute independence that is, by nature, the most seductive characteristic that exists. He who does not need anyone to feel complete is seen as superior, and what is superior is inevitably desired. Keep her always in expectation, allowing her to taste crumbs of proximity before feeling again the cold of your distance, creating a dance of heat and ice that generates a visceral dependence. By withdrawing the pleasure of your presence, the void becomes unbearable, forcing her to throw herself in your direction with much more force than before. Master the rhythm. Alternate predictability with surprise, and transform your every word into a precious relic she will beg to possess. In the end, Machiavelli's advice echoes: do not be just a man among so many others. Be the prince of your own existence, the inevitable destiny of whoever crosses your path. When you become this archetype, you will never again need to ask for anything, for everyone will already be willing to give you everything they possess.